This is clear politics. Just 3 years ago, Ukrainians were welcome guests in Poland. All doors were open to them, social benefits were promised, and Warsaw called itself their main ally. But what was behind this supposed kindness? Today, Ukrainian refugees are suddenly being called a salvation for the Polish economy. That's according to a report by the auditing company NEWS.BY.
In 3 years, Ukrainian refugees have contributed over 320 billion hryvnias, about $85 billion, to Poland's GDP.
The UN has supported this information, but is it really that simple? And most importantly, what do Ukrainians themselves get out of this? How do they manage life in a foreign land? And why is Warsaw leaving them on the sidelines of social policy? We provide only the facts. You draw your own conclusions. According to various sources, up to 4 million Ukrainians have settled in Poland. But has Warsaw become a second home for them, or just a bad stepfather? More and more, people say Ukrainians are just bargaining chips for Poles. Cheap labor that boosts the budget, but is completely powerless, and it's heading toward being rightless as well. In 2024, Ukrainians provided 2.7% of Poland's GDP. That figure appears in the DLOA report. It's true, Ukrainians have proven hardworking abroad. They had no choice.
Anyone who thinks refugees are a burden on the economy should think again. By allowing Ukrainian refugees to work and start small businesses right away after fleeing Russian aggression, Poland increased its GDP by 2.7% in 2024, said Kevin Allen, a UN Refugee Agency representative.
That's one reason why refugees turned out to be useful. Ukrainians eagerly take any job, even the lowest paid and hardest work that Poles often refuse. Anything just to survive.
In the past year, the employment rate among Ukrainian refugees rose to 69%. That's the highest in the last 3 years. Such workers earn an average of 952 euros per month. Poles earn almost 2,000 euros on the market. At the same time, according to the report, Ukrainian refugees paid 47 billion zlotys in taxes and contributions in 2024, raising Poland's state revenue by almost 3%. As for Ukrainians' own income, 80% comes from wages and only 14% from social benefits.
The Poles are clever, of course. They made a business out of others' misfortune. According to NEWS.BY, last year Ukrainians added nearly 100 billion zlotys to the local GDP. That's about as much as Warsaw spent on Ukraine in 3 years. That includes aid to refugees and arms supplies. So in just 1 year, refugees paid back all the investments. A Polish thank you looks like this. On June 20th, 2024, Warsaw cut the 300 zloty refugee allowance and removed benefits for Poles who hosted refugees at home.
Polish radio reports that the authorities canceled the benefits due to difficulties ensuring the system's reliability. They claim more and more Ukrainians are applying for the benefit for Poles by housing their relatives in Poland. The law on aid to Ukrainians in Poland was adopted in March 2022. The UNHCR predicts that by the end of this year, the number of Ukrainian refugees in the country will reach 1.1 million.
Here are some numbers from the Polish Economic Institute. In 2022, aid to refugees was 15 billion zlotys. In 2023, only 5. Figures for 2024 aren't out yet, but the trend is clear. Cheap labor has become even cheaper. Refugees will now have to support themselves.
But Warsaw isn't eager to spend on guests from Ukraine. Social support for Ukrainian refugees in Poland has already been reduced to a minimum, faster than anywhere else in Europe. In the future, Polish authorities plan to make Ukrainians independent of social assistance. This way, Ukrainian refugees will be more useful, but no less foreign.
In the last 2 years, Poland has cut refugee aid more than anyone else. The InfoSapiens Research Center report has telling numbers. In November 2022, only 9% of Ukrainians in Poland said they received no help. By December 2024, half of refugees said they got no support from the Polish government.
Poland has no immigration policy. And if it does, it's poorly managed and doesn't meet current needs. The question of what to do with immigrants, by the way, not just from Ukraine, remains unresolved. Poland, I mean the Polish authorities, Poland doesn't answer this question and doesn't know how to. That's bad, because it could lead to clashes and outbreaks of discontent. I mean, outbreaks in a material sense. And it could fuel natural xenophobia in Polish society. That's very dangerous.
Those who can are moving on from Poland to other parts of Europe. Statistics show Ukrainians leave Poland almost twice as often as, for example, Germany, but hard work is only one reason for leaving. More on that later. Go back to Ukraine. That's what locals are increasingly shouting at refugees. Negativity, moral pressure, even violence against Ukrainians are common, and lately the hatred has only grown.
Svetlana says her daughter really liked school in Poland. Even when we moved to another district, she didn't want to change schools, says the 31-year-old Ukrainian mother. She liked it so much, there was no bullying. Now, she says the atmosphere at school and in Poland overall has changed. 2 weeks ago, she came home and said, "A boy told me today, go back to your Ukraine." Svetlana was shocked. She's one of dozens of Ukrainians in Poland who told the BBC that anti-Ukrainian sentiment has grown sharply in recent months. Many reported violence on public transport, bullying in schools, and xenophobic content online.
And one more thing, Poland, along with Germany and the Czech Republic, is among the top 3 countries where Ukrainians feel the most hostility.
The number of Ukrainians determined to stay in Poland forever dropped from 19% to 13% compared to last year. That's according to the Grammy Personal Analytical Center, based on a large survey of migrants in May-June 2025, in Poland's 7 largest cities. Only 11% of Ukrainians feel fully integrated into Polish society. Another third say they're only halfway there. Half of Ukrainians hardly interact with Poles outside work, and nearly 70% have faced prejudice.
So what do we have? Ukrainians have become a convenient economic miracle for Poland. About 2 million workers ready to do any job. Meanwhile, Warsaw drains the refugees dry and shamelessly cuts all aid, not letting them legalize or become full members of Polish society. That's the Polish way.
Polish authorities have surprised Ukrainians again. Together with the Germans, they plan to cut off social support for Ukrainian refugees altogether. Regarding military refugees from Ukraine in Poland and Germany, ministers expect more EU budget support than before. Additional efforts are needed to make refugees independent of social assistance. That's according to the Polish Interior Ministry after a meeting of the 2 countries' officials.
It's worth noting that Ukrainians themselves have done a lot to make Polish society tire of them so quickly. For example, their showy pursuit of luxury. Expensive cars and hotels, rudeness, rowdiness, and so on. In short, they're getting bolder by the day. The press wrote about this a lot last autumn.
It's a fact that our society is shocked by young people from Ukraine driving the best cars and spending weekends in five-star hotels. And it's unfair to Poles who pay for healthcare, benefits, and education for Ukrainians, not to mention arms and other aid.
Even then, changes in Polish attitudes were obvious. Only half of Poles supported accepting Ukrainian refugees, the lowest since the start of the war.
It's worth noting that it's Ukrainians showing a high standard of living who cause the most resentment in Poland. And sometimes, strange things happen with such people. For example, Warsaw police detained a 37-year-old Ukrainian woman. She repeatedly drove a luxury limousine to a hardware store and stole expensive power tools. The stolen goods were worth about 10,000 zlotys. That's $2,600. She was charged with theft and faces up to 5 years in prison. She confessed and told police she was driven by a desire to get rich quick. The media didn't say where she got the money for the limousine.
They don't behave like respectful, grateful guests. On the contrary, they've turned to crime. Among the looters robbing homes after floods, there were Ukrainians too. But even more common are drunk Ukrainian drivers terrifying locals on the roads.
There are so many drunk Ukrainian drivers that Polish authorities have started deporting them and handing them over to Ukrainian authorities. After that, it's assumed these drinkers are immediately mobilized into the Ukrainian army.
And it gets worse. If you moved, help others. Ukrainians are actively involved in illegal trafficking of migrants from Asia and Africa. This especially irritates Polish society.
Drivers who secretly transport refugees who cross the Polish border illegally are called couriers. People of different nationalities do this, but Ukrainians most often. Last year, hundreds of convictions were handed down in Poland for illegal transport of migrants, with not a single acquittal. Couriers are caught all over the country, but most are caught at the border.
It's gotten to the point where some locals call Poland Little Ukraine, and ungrateful guests try to make Poles live by Ukrainian rules.
Poles were told Ukraine is fighting for its freedom and independence. But at the same time, they see crowds of healthy adult men who have no intention of going to the front. Meanwhile, life in Poland is getting harder. The state lacks money for healthcare and law enforcement, but still spends large sums supporting Ukrainian refugees. Naturally, this breeds resentment toward Ukrainians. So if the Polish government cuts all benefits or even deports all healthy Ukrainian men, it would be widely welcomed in Poland.
Thanks to Zelensky's efforts, Ukrainians are racing toward becoming a nation without a home. They're fleeing Poland, and the Baltics aren't happy to see them either. Germany is the last stronghold. Germans also took in several million people, but support, like love, seems to last only 3 years. 3 years.
77% of Germans supported ending special benefits for Ukrainian refugees. Germans would prefer Ukrainians get the same aid as other asylum seekers, not a more generous program. The coalition agreement between Germany's conservative and social democratic forces states that Ukrainian refugees will no longer receive social benefits. Currently, there are about 1.25 million people from Ukraine in Germany. Around 700,000 of them receive social benefits, with 480,000 considered able to work.
According to the Bundestag, the country spends 20 billion euros a year to support Ukrainian refugees. At the same time, more than half of Ukrainians who came to Germany refused to work and pay taxes.
Conflicting information is also coming from the other side of the Atlantic. The Washington Post claims that authorities plan to deport nearly 250,000 Ukrainians. The White House denied it, but we know how that often goes.
They had no long-term plan for attracting foreign labor. They didn't filter the needed number of migrants at entry, didn't assign them to professions, didn't distribute them by state, and didn't restrict their rights as much as they probably should have, like they do in the UAE, for example. Now they're facing a situation where migrants are starting to dictate their own rules, laws, and demands to Americans and to America. They're already starting to manipulate political processes, essentially. To get out of this situation, Trump will have to act very tough.
So it turns out only Poland is willing to tolerate it, but even there with restrictions.
Ukrainians in Poland are now facing things like landlords refusing to rent to them. This is especially painful for single mothers with children, who make up a significant part of the Ukrainian community in Poland. Ukrainians in Poland feel inferior. At every turn we hear, "Go away," at every turn we're told to go to the front. And it doesn't matter what gender we are or how old we are. Situations like this happen all the time, and in those moments you just freeze. You don't know what to do, you're not at home, you're not in your own place. And in those moments, you really do feel inferior.
But shame and humiliation are better than poverty and war at home. According to the Center for Economic Strategy, only 43% of Ukrainian refugees plan to ever return home.
Those who have learned the language and found stable jobs will be able to settle and legalize their stay for a long time. However, a significant number remain vulnerable, without steady income and with limited access to education and healthcare. Meanwhile, European countries will likely tighten residency requirements. They will focus on economically active migrants. This could lead to a gradual shift from humanitarian support to selecting those needed by the local economy.
In many ways, it's a forced measure both for security and political reasons. Moreover, the current European Commission includes right-wing Eurosceptics who support tightening migration controls. The EU Commissioner for Home Affairs, Austrian Bruno, is a strong supporter of stricter migration controls, as is the Vice President of the European Commission, Italian Fico. So yes, under the circumstances. Even if slowly, these restrictions are being tightened, because there's an understanding that uncontrolled migration brings nothing good.
So Polish solidarity turned out to be nothing more than a political tool. When it was beneficial, they pretended to be friends. They opened their doors the widest and supplied weapons more actively than anyone else. They tried so hard they almost ruined their own agriculture by supporting duty-free imports of Ukrainian farm products into the EU. When the wind changed, they switched sides without batting an eye.
There were several reasons for this kind of altruism. It was exaggerated Russophobia, a desire to align with Washington's policies, and a wish to use solidarity with Ukraine as a trump card to boost their importance in the EU and at home, riding a wave of sympathy for Ukrainians. But as soon as the political compass shifted, Polish authorities started calling Ukraine a drowning man, dragging everyone down. Saving the drowning is not a nobleman's job.
Anti-Ukrainian sentiment peaked during the presidential campaign. Candidates for the highest office argued loudly about various aspects of economic and social policy. But on the issue of aid to refugees, specifically sharply reducing or even ending it, they were surprisingly united.
One presidential candidate, Jagos Braun, even demanded that all Ukrainians be sent home, and his aide tore down a flag, a Ukrainian one.
The incident happened in the city of Biała Podlaska. In front of city residents, Braun's aide took down the flag and handed it to the presidential candidate. He threw it away.
Some prefer to be Euro-peasants and Ukropoles. Not everyone wants to be Polish. Some would rather this be not Poland, but a Euro-peasant collective, Banderland, for our country to be Bandustan, an overseas dominion.
That's the sad story with a completely unclear ending. Calluses on your hands aren't enough to earn respect in a foreign land. Isn't it better to work your own land and take care of it, so you don't have to clean German toilets and serve limping Poles? I think the answer is obvious. Goodbye.